and now the special perspective from Dublin, which has been in the eye of the storm, but where many things, interesting things, have been going on. So,
well, first of all, I think it's important to set a little background here. The European Union grew out of a mood and a change to prevent human slaughter, where 60 million people lost their lives in 2 world wars. And the Union was founded on the principles of cooperation, of solidarity, and of trust. The reason this crisis has grown to the extent that it has in the last couple of years is by incompetence of some governments, by lack of concentration and focus on what Europe should be about, and by interminable interwrangling between institutions and politicians about national issues. National issues are very important because politics is always about people. What I've been saying for quite some time, that lack of trust, Lionel, was evident, not only in the markets having no trust in Europe, because they didn't trust them to make the decisions and follow through, but also between many of the governments themselves, that the level of trust in terms of the principles upon which Europe was founded wasn't evident. Now, I think that in the last period, in the last recent period, I see growing signs of renewed confidence among the leaders who sit around the table, where we're privileged to sit on occasions as leaders of our countries. I'll give you a couple of examples. Firstly, the drafting of the wording of the intergovernmental agreement has by and large come to this point without any great wrangling, like you used to have on lots of other occasions. Secondly, the decision that was agreed to bring forward the ESM with its 500 billion fund to an earlier date and to review that capacity of that later. Thirdly, to allow the EFSF to run in parallel to that with the funds that have been unused, which are about 250 billion. And fourthly, the diminishing political sort of controversy that there was about the European Central Bank and its role in financial markets and the sovereign issues. I think there are examples in the recent past of a growing sense of trust. So I would like to think that we can conclude on Monday and that the European leaders can focus on the potential of the single market and the European Union. I support what's been said both by the President, by Hella and by Irki. This is about the future, creating that future, and the future is the only place where we have to live. So it's a necessity that political leaders understand that their remit from their people is always for a period, and in that period we should work together in the common interests of the peoples of Europe. So as a country that's a member of the Eurozone within the European Union, from the currency perspective, it's very necessary that there be a defence of that currency and that there be no inconsistency or lack of confidence about that. That's in the interests of things that we have spoken about as different leaders in respect of investment, job opportunities, the future of our peoples, careers for young people, and these can all happen because of political decisions. I have to say, this is the time to be in politics, to deal with this crisis. It might be very nice sometimes, but I have never been as confident that politics and trust among political leaders can actually sort out this particular problem and allow Europe to flourish in the way that I know that it can.
Thank you, Prime Minister. There are a number of fascinating points raised by those interventions. I'd just like to seek, if I may, one or two clarifications. First of all, Madam Thorning-Schmidt, you said you expressed some reservations about building Europe and about institution building, and obviously Denmark is not part of the Eurozone. But as the monetary union develops, and as measures are taken to ensure that the monetary union survives and thrives, surely there will be new institution building, more rules, and indeed the British government, for example, has urged there to be deeper fiscal integration. What is your perspective? Is that something you see inevitable? You're not worried about being outside it?
I don't think I expressed myself very clearly, if that was your impression that I was against institutions, because I was trying to express rather the opposite. I think it is in a time of turmoil that we have right now, where we have all this talk of crisis, all these things, that we should preserve our way of doing things. What is our way of doing things in Europe? It is that we have rule of law. It is that we have strong institutions. It is that we have a European Court of Justice if we don't agree. It is that we all have to comply with the rules, and if we don't, we even have sanctions if we don't comply with the rules. So I am very much in favour of a rule-based EU. This has always been an advantage for a small member state or small member states, but my point is also that it is an advantage for all member states if we have rule of law, strong institutions, the community method as we like to talk about, and it is exactly when we have problems that we should maintain that way of working together. Right now we have economic difficulties, and we are trying with the so-called fiscal compact to work on solving these economic difficulties. I completely agree with Jyrki, who says it would have been better if we could have done that within our treaties. We couldn't, so this is the second best solution. It is still a good solution. This is what we are working on now, and hopefully when the three of us meet on Monday again, we will conclude a framework for the next way of disciplining our economies and keeping the agreements that we make with each other.
Fine. Prime Minister Katainen, then I'd like to ask President Komorowski a question, please.
Two short comments on what Helle said. The importance of the institutions comes from the fact that the EU must be a rule-based union, and now we are talking about the legitimacy of the EU, and there, because we are dealing with an extremely difficult crisis, people are quite worried. They are worried what will happen to our country, how much we have to pay the other country's bill and stuff like this. So there is no room for kind of unclarity, who is preparing and what, and therefore we need strong institutions, because we have to, at the same time when dealing with the crisis, we have to take care of the legitimacy of the EU. The second point, even though we are now preparing intergovernmental agreement on economic issues or rules, it does not that much differ whether the country is in the Eurozone or outside of the Eurozone, because now we are creating rules which are common sense rules, which are good for everybody. Of course, there are issues in which Eurozone countries must probably go deeper, but basically now we are creating rules which are good for everybody, no matter whether the country is using euro or krone or whatever the currency.
Okay, let me just take up this question of maintaining cohesion, even as certain countries cooperate more tightly and deeply. President Komorowski, Poland has aspirations to join the single currency. How do you think the rest of the Union, the Eurozone members, should conduct themselves in order that those outside are not in any way disfavored?
Well, what I think is that it is really bad if Europe deals only with its internal problems. Undoubtedly, as far as the description of the crisis is concerned, I believe that we have to add to your description also great challenges connected with the gigantic competition that is posed in the world. Europe, if it doesn't develop faster, it can simply lose its position as a leader in terms of the economic power in the world. Europe cannot keep its position and at the same time its attractiveness its role model in all other areas of our globe and different ways of life, economy, our attitude to the rule of law, all the imponderability that decide about the difference of the culture of the European civilization. Europe cannot keep our position of being competitive in the face of the emerging of new gigantic centers for development in the world if Europe does not first of all, if Europe does not open up the sources for its own economic development. Secondly, if it lacks courage in the widespreading of its own ideas, for example, in the frameworks of cooperation with the neighboring regions and the countries, and if Europe is not active in the area which is not limited solely to the solution of its own internal problems. And from this perspective, it is extremely important to realize that when we decide about things that are important for the future of Europe, that we involve in this decision-making process the countries that can contribute with their vitality and their own success. I do not want to quote here a Polish example, but a Swedish example is also worthwhile analysis. Sweden is also outside of the Eurozone, but currently it contributes with very much indeed in terms of hope for the economic development of the whole European Union. And in Poland we are concerned that the very legalistic and very restrictive approach to the solution of the problems of the Eurozone can limit the European Union and the necessary process of recovery, getting back its energy and its vitality, also in the economic area. We are afraid that the Eurozone, well, if we limit our thinking about the future of the European Union to thinking about the recovery of the Eurozone only, we will lose many opportunities. We support the idea of thinking along the lines that go beyond the evaluation of the crisis as the phenomenon that touches solely on the Eurozone member states.
Before I turn to Prime Minister Kenny, just a quick follow-up here. You offered some mild criticism of the excessively legalistic approach to resolving the Euro's problems. But surely, if you have rules, you need that they are enforced, and therefore, by law, a legalistic approach is required. Otherwise, there's no confidence or trust.
Well, I fully agree with what you were saying, but, well, it is not Poland that violated the rules. Well, Poland did not infringe other things. Well, infringe trust, something you cannot do politics without. Well, certainly we are having to do with some phenomena that really damage our mutual trust, and they curb this trust for the future. And we have to search for some legal mechanisms that can really limit such a risk for the future, do away with it. It is absolutely obvious, but it should definitely not be contrary to the principle of the co-decision of all the member states of the European Union. And I can give you an example of Poland here. Poland, well, in our constitution, for over a dozen of years, we have had this principle introduced which does not allow us to increase the budgetary deficit above a certain threshold, and the Eurozone member states are only going to introduce this principle to their domestic legal systems. From this perspective, we are already armed in different solutions which, even if they do not give the full guarantee, they still increase chances for having a genuine basis for mutual trust and a sense of confidence within the European Union.
Thank you, President Roberts. Prime Minister, what has been essentially said on this platform this afternoon is that the original design for monetary union was flawed. Sanctions were ignored. The no bailout clause has proven to be empty. Oversight of competitiveness, questions current account deficits, all this went by the by. So when we're now rebuilding the monetary union, I think it would be very interesting to listen a little to what Ireland has done in the last 2 years after a spectacular property crash to show what is necessary, if you like, to ensure, if you really want to be membership of this Eurozone, these are the steps you need to take. It'd be quite interesting to listen.
Well, we're not there yet. I think it's important to say that Ireland has been a very strong member of the European Union since we joined back in the 70s. We've had quite a number of referenda on European issues. We've always supported those. Sometimes when they weren't explained properly to people, they may have had to have a second opportunity to make that decision. But what happened in our country was that people simply went mad with borrowing. The extent of personal credit, personal wealth created on credit, was done between people, banks, a system that spawned greed to a point where this went out of control completely with the spectacular crash that you mentioned. The country borrowed over 60 billion at excessive rates, and the IMF eventually came in with the Troika. So what's happened in the meantime? Well, last year in a general election, people gave a very clear mandate to the government I lead, the strongest mandate in the history of our country, to sort out this problem. And that meant explaining to people the reality of the scale of the challenge, the truth of where Ireland actually stood. I think it's got to be understood that people are very pragmatic, and that the political process and politicians should never underestimate people's capacity to want to assist government in helping out problems like this. So we've had to take drastic action in terms of complying with the conditions of the arrival of the Troika. Now, we've had 5 different assessments by Troika from the ECB, the Commission and the IMF. And on each of those assessments, there has been a deeply intensive analysis of Ireland's performance for the period past and Ireland's intentions in the context of the Memorandum of Understanding for the future. And I'm glad to say that our people understand the scale of that challenge, and we have measured up in each and every one of those conditions. But that has meant a reduction in public salaries, it's meant a reduction in the cost of the public sector, the size of the public sector, increases in the pension age. But as a consequence, you've had increases in competitiveness and opportunities that have presented themselves as a consequence. As Hella said, people have refocused on their values, on what it is that they want to contribute to the well-being of the country. So we're in a programme, Lionel. It runs until the end of 2013. Yesterday, as a small measure, small step of confidence, the Treasury Management Agency, which was reported in your own paper, reported on a debt swap, a change from January 2014 to January 2015 of 3.5 billion. Now, that's only a small step in what is a very long journey for us. But people become frustrated if they don't see results, and they want to see where the light shines and where the days of prosperity return. And that's why it's very important for government to be able to continuously interact with people and explain the journey to the implementation of the plan. And that's why, in the context of the European Union and our colleagues around the table, that support and that cooperation and that solidarity is fundamental to any country making its progress here. So our attributes are we've always been a small open economy, very strong on exports because we export 90% of what we produce. And that means that on the basis of us, let us say, being a country that has political stability, and a young population, energetic education system, able to meet the demands and the requirements of the flexibilities that are coming with nanotechnology and digital internet and all of these things that are changing the world we live in as we speak. Right. So we want to be part of that future. We recognize we've got a challenge in closing the deficit we have of 15, 16 billion, but also to avail of the opportunities that clearly exist as being a member of what is the most powerful trading bloc in the world. And if, as leaders, we can focus through the presidencies on what it is that we have to do, my belief is that the future of the Union can actually be very strong and very profitable. I'll give you examples of where we would be later. Things like the single market, which we've discussed before, the single patent, said to Turkey outside, if you have an innovation and you look for a patent in Finland or in Denmark, it should be applicable across the Union. That's what the single market is about.
So is the Irish medicine, the Irish cod liver oil for export to Southern Europe? Because conventional wisdom is that this kind of adjustment, severe adjustment, can so easily lead to social unrest. And indeed, Prime Minister Mario Monti just the other day was warning that there could be a backlash unless there is something in return for these austerity measures. How do you see this?
Change is always difficult, and when people become used to a particular structure and a set way of life, very difficult to change that in the common interest and the common good. I spoke to Prime Minister Monti just this week. He comes from a background of a status as a former commissioner understanding the institutions, but bringing a sort of a non-political perspective to dealing with Italy's problems. From our perspective, as I said, it's always important to explain to people what you're doing and to explain to them that when you get to a further point along the road, what that actually means. But what do people see from politics? Okay, they may say they're all cynical, they're all for themselves, or they're all the same. But when you focus on what politics should actually deliver for people, it is jobs, employment, careers, family opportunities. That's when they see the relevance of hard political decisions that result in benefit for countries and for people. If you ask me to transfer the cod liver oil or the medicine that Ireland has to take, which is not nice, believe you me, to other places, this is also a matter of culture. Yes. It's a matter of how you want to participate in the union of which you remember. And as has been pointed out by all three here, if you sign on, there are conditions and rules and regulations. You cannot throw these out the window and forget them and just avail of the benefits. You've got to work to make that happen.
Prime Minister Katainen?
Yeah, I think the Irish model to regain the confidence is the model which we need all over the Europe. I don't see any other choice. If we are lacking, or the country is lacking of confidence, the country is lacking of confidence, its own citizens, its own companies, it's lacking of confidence of the investors from outside. What you can do? You have to do whatever it takes to regain the confidence. And there is no shortcut to heaven. And I mean, the confidence comes when everybody knows what is bad and what is good, what is right and what is wrong. It might be painful, but if you say that the good is bad, or other ways around, bad is good, then there is no confidence. So you just have to look the truth to the eyes and do whatever is needed. Of course, I know everywhere there are risks of social unrest, but if the people's soul is constructed so that if the soul buy your message, it can accept even severe or bad-tasting medicines. But if you don't trust on the message, if your soul says that the thing what the politician is saying is not true, then the bad-tasting medicine is very difficult to accept. So we just have to go through the grey stone. Nevertheless, it was very hard.
That's an important point. Because, for instance, in our case, last year, we turned what was 10 years of a balance of payments deficit into a surplus for the first time. And that's because people, when they give a mandate and they give trust to government and say, here's the plan, let's all work together in this interest, things can actually happen faster than people might imagine.
Okay, Prime Minister very quickly, and then I'm going to open up.
Yeah, I don't know how quick it will be. I think it is very important when we talk about austerity and talk about how we have to change our societies and how people have to bear this burden, that there are at least two things we have to bear in mind. One is that if we are going to have austerity measures and consolidate our economies, which I firmly believe we do have to do, all the countries that can find it within their own economic possibilities should also focus on growth. I think people will accept austerity if we also talk about growth and jobs. That's one thing. The other thing is that when we have austerity, the burdens should be equally distributed. What do I mean by that? I mean that everyone should be part of this austerity. And basically, I very much agree with both Enda and Jyrki when we are saying you're observing in your population that people are prepared to take hard decisions. People are prepared to make sacrifices. But it is also very important that we remember that whilst people are prepared to make sacrifices, they will not be sacrificed. And this is what we need to remember in all these austerity programs, that we must not sacrifice part of our population. We had this term for a long time saying that certain financial institutions, banks, they were too big to fail. But I think there's a lot of people who are feeling that they are too small to matter. And this is what we also need to focus on in times of austerity, that we also focus on how we build things again and focus on the light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you very much indeed.